am stuck in here! Look out, he's got more of it!
Get me out of this green slime!
They said it was a community pool. It was not a community pool. It had never been a community pool. It was a private pool, built on my private lot, inside my fenced private yard, with a gate that I locked every evening and that had been locked every evening for 4 years, except for the mornings when I unlocked it, and the evenings when I relocked it, and the specific Tuesday and Thursday mornings in July and August, when I had been arriving at 6:45 to swim my laps, and had found the gate unlocked, the water surface disturbed, and a damp towel folded on the third step of my pool ladder in the specific way that someone folds a towel when they want to be tidy but not invisible. I had found it 4 times before I understood what I was finding. The 5th time I understood completely. My name is Patricia Sohn. I am 54 years old. I spent 18 years as a litigator before I moved to the bench as a magistrate judge, a position I held for 7 years before retiring in 2021 to write, travel, and maintain the garden and the pool that I had been planning since the day I bought my lot in Fairview Oaks in 2017, and hired a landscape architect to design what I described to her as a private sanctuary that functions as both an exercise facility and an aesthetic environment, and that the word private in that description carries its full legal meaning. The woman who had been using my pool without permission was Constance Pryor, 61, board president of the Fairview Oaks HOA, owner of the lot immediately adjacent to mine on the south, and the woman who had been present at the HOA board meeting in 2018 when I had presented my pool installation plans, received approval, and specifically asked whether the board had any concerns about the pool being designated as a private facility with no community access. Constance had said, at that meeting, that private pools in Fairview Oaks were entirely private, and that the HOA had no claim on any homeowner's private amenity. She had said it clearly, and it had been recorded in the board minutes that I had kept a copy of because I kept copies of everything that might become relevant. It had apparently not occurred to Constance at the time that her statement would become directly applicable to her own behavior 4 years later. Comment below where you are watching from, because this story does not end with a dramatic confrontation. It ends with a legal process that a retired magistrate judge conducted with the specific thoroughness that 7 years on the bench produces. A civil judgment that covered 3 years of unauthorized use of a private facility. A criminal conviction for trespass that Constance Pryor received after declining 2 offers to resolve the matter privately. And a pool that has been entirely, unambiguously, irrevocably mine since the morning I installed the camera system and waited. Part 1104. Fairview Oaks is a 79-home development in central Tennessee, built between 2009 and 2015 on land that had been an apple orchard in its previous incarnation, and that retained, in the pattern of its streets and the persistence of certain root systems that the development grading had not fully removed, the gentle undulations of orchard terrain. I had purchased my lot in 2017 specifically because it was a corner lot with the largest private yard in the development, which the landscape architect I hired had described as unusual square footage for a planned community. The pool had been designed as a lap pool, narrow and long, with a resistance current system that allowed serious swimming in a compact footprint. It was 25 meters long and 3 meters wide, built along the eastern boundary of my yard, with privacy fencing on 3 sides and the house itself forming the 4th boundary. The fence was 6 feet, cedar, installed by the same contractor who built the pool, permitted by the county, inspected and approved, with a self-closing gate on the north side that I locked with a padlock every evening. The pool had been operational since the summer of 2019. I swam 6 mornings a week from May through September, and 3 mornings a week from October through April using a pool heater I had installed for year-round use. My schedule was consistent. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday at 6:30, Tuesday and Thursday at 6:45, because I had a standing telephone call with my daughter in Portland at 6:15 on those mornings, and it ran slightly long because she was raising my granddaughter, and the conversations were worth the extra minutes. Saturday at 7. I did not vary this schedule materially from week to week because I had learned in my years as a litigator and then as a judge that the discipline of a fixed schedule was more valuable than the flexibility of an adaptable one when the schedule served a genuine purpose. The consistency of my schedule was what made the Tuesday and Thursday pattern visible. If I had arrived at random times, I might not have noticed that the water surface on Tuesday and Thursday mornings had a quality of recent disturbance that the other mornings did not have. A lap pool with a resistance current that has been still all night has a specific surface character in the morning light. I had been swimming in this pool for 3 years, and I knew that character. The first time I noticed the damp towel, it was a Tuesday in July, the second summer of ownership. I had assumed I had left it from the previous session and had thought nothing more of it. The second time was a Thursday in August of the same year. I had been more attentive. The towel was damp in the specific way that something is damp when it was wet recently rather than the previous day, and it was folded in a way that I had not folded it because I fold towels differently, which is a small thing to know about yourself, but the kind of small thing that becomes significant when you are the retired magistrate judge standing at your pool gate at 6:45 in the morning holding a damp towel that you did not leave there. I had looked at the gate latch carefully that morning. The padlock was in place. The gate was locked. The latch mechanism showed no sign of forced entry. There was no damage to the fence. Either someone had a key to my padlock, which was a master lock key to a key that I kept in my kitchen drawer and had not given to anyone, or someone had entered and exited by another means. I walked the fence perimeter. The south fence, the fence that ran along the property line shared with Constance Pryor's lot, had a section where 2 boards were slightly less firmly set than the adjacent boards. I pressed them from my side. They flexed. I went to the other side from my garden and looked at the base of those boards from the outside. The boards had been carefully unscrewed from the bottom rail and reattached with shorter screws that allowed them to be pushed inward and then snapped back into place from either side. The modification was not obvious. It required knowing to look for it. I found it because I walked the fence perimeter with the attention of someone who had spent 7 years examining evidence and understanding that the truth of a situation was in the details rather than the presentation. I pressed the boards from the outside. They pushed inward. I went back inside the fence and pressed them back. From inside the fence, the boards looked entirely normal. Someone had modified my fence to allow entry and exit without a key, and had done it with sufficient care that the modification was only visible when you were looking for it at the base of the boards. I took photographs from both sides. I noted the location, the specific boards, the type of screws, the manner of the modification. I went inside my house and made coffee and thought about what to do next. I was a retired magistrate judge. I had spent 7 years deciding how evidence was to be gathered, assessed, and presented. I understood the difference between knowing something and being able to prove it. I knew who had modified my fence. The modification was on the section shared with Constance Pryor's lot. The pattern was Tuesday and Thursday mornings. The damp towel was folded with the specific neatness of someone who wanted to leave things tidy. Constance Pryor was a meticulous person. I had observed that at HOA board meetings in the maintenance of her yard, and in the specific way she organized the shared common area adjacent to our properties. I knew. I could not prove it. I needed to prove it. I did not repair the fence modification. I photographed it extensively and then left it in place. I ordered a camera system. 4 cameras, weatherproof, motion-activated, recording to a cloud storage account, with sufficient resolution to capture identification detail at the distance between the fence and the pool. I had them installed by a licensed security contractor on a Saturday when Constance was at a board meeting that I knew about because I read the HOA board meeting schedule that was distributed monthly to all homeowners. The cameras were positioned to cover the fence section with the modified boards, the pool deck, the pool itself, and the gate area. I had the contractor position them with angles that minimized the coverage of any area beyond my fence line, which was both appropriate and deliberate. I wanted footage of my property and my property only. 2 cameras covered the fence section from different angles. 1 camera covered the pool deck and ladder. 1 camera covered the gate. The contractor tested the system and confirmed the cloud storage was recording correctly. I went inside. I changed the padlock to a combination lock whose combination I would remember without writing down, eliminating any possibility that a key duplication was involved. I left the fence modification in place. I waited. Part 2, 2705. The following Tuesday, I was on my phone call with my daughter at 6:15 as usual. At 6:22, my phone received a motion alert from the camera system. I looked at the notification while I was talking to my daughter. I told her I needed to call her back. She said, "Mom, what is happening?" I said, "I believe I am about to have documentation." She said, "Of what?" I said, "Of something I have been waiting to document." She said, "You are alarming me." I said, "I am fine, I will explain later." I ended the call and opened the camera application. The motion trigger had come from the fence camera. I watched the live feed. At 6:23, I watched 2 fence boards push inward from the outside, flex to approximately 30 degrees, and allow a person to enter my pool enclosure by turning sideways and stepping through the gap. The person was Constance Pryor. She was wearing a bathing suit with a cover-up over it. She was carrying a tote bag. She went directly to the pool ladder, removed the cover-up and placed it in the tote bag, placed the tote bag on the pool deck, and descended into the pool. I watched her swim 4 laps of the pool on the camera feed. I documented the time. I took screenshots from the live feed at 30-second intervals showing her face clearly in the pool. At 6:41, she climbed out of the pool, toweled off with a towel she had brought in her tote bag, folded it the specific way I had seen it folded 4 times before, placed the towel in the tote bag, put on her cover-up, and went to the fence section. She pushed the boards outward from inside, stepped through, and was on her side of the property line at 6:43. I called an attorney who handled civil trespass and property matters in our county. Her name was Ellen Park, and she had been in practice for 16 years. I had met her through a professional organization after I left the bench and had noted her as someone whose analytical approach I respected. I called her at 6:45. She answered because I had told her when we met that if I called outside of normal business hours, it would be because I needed an attorney rather than a colleague. She listened to what I had found and what I had documented and what I had just watched on my camera feed. She said, "Patricia, you have footage of someone entering your private property through a modified fence section and using your private pool without your permission." I said, "Yes." She said, "Who is this person?" I said, "The board president of my HOA." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "How long has this been occurring?" I said at least 3 years based on the pattern of disturbance I had noticed and the state of the fence modification when I found it. She said, "I will come to your house this morning." She came at 10. I showed her the footage. I showed her the fence modification. I showed her the photographs I had taken over the preceding weeks. I showed her the board meeting minutes from 2018 in which Constance Pryor had stated clearly that private pools in Fairview Oaks were entirely private and that the HOA had no claim on any homeowner's private amenity. Ellen read the board minutes twice. She said this at a board meeting. I said yes, and it was recorded in the minutes. She said about private pools specifically. I said yes. She said, "And then used your private pool for 3 years." I said that is what the evidence indicates. Ellen said, "Patricia, I want to be direct with you about the options. We can approach this as a civil matter seeking damages for 3 years of unauthorized use of a private facility. We can approach this as a criminal matter by filing a trespass complaint with the sheriff's department. We can approach it as both simultaneously. We can also approach Constance Pryor directly, give her an opportunity to acknowledge the situation and resolve it privately before any formal proceeding is initiated." I said, What would resolution look like? Ellen said an apology, an acknowledgement, cessation of the behavior. Repair of my fence to its original condition at her expense, and a payment representing the fair market value of the unauthorized use of the pool facility for 3 years. I said, what is the fair market value of 3 years of pool access in this community? She said she would need to look at comparable private pool memberships in the area and the equivalent access value. She had a figure within the week. Comparable private pool club memberships in the county ran between $800 and $1,200 annually for unlimited access. 3 years of access at the midpoint, $1,000 annually, was $3,000. Ellen added to that the fence repair costs, which I had estimated at approximately $400 based on the modification that had been made, and her legal fees to date, which were $2,100. The demand she sent to Constance Pryor on a Monday morning was for $5,500, repair of the fence modification, a written apology, and a written commitment to cease all access to my property. The demand was delivered by certified mail and email. Constance did not respond within the 5-business-day window Ellen had specified. Ellen sent a follow-up. Constance's response to the follow-up, which arrived 8 days after the original demand, was a 3-paragraph letter written without legal counsel that said the pool had always been understood in the neighborhood as a shared community amenity because of its location and size, that Patricia had never explicitly told her the pool was private, and that the demand was excessive and she did not intend to pay it. I read this response with the specific attention I had applied to thousands of legal arguments in 7 years on the bench. 3 things stood out. First, she had not denied using the pool. Second, her claim that the pool had always been understood as a shared amenity was contradicted by her own statement at the 2018 board meeting. Third, she had described the pool as a shared community amenity in writing, which was potentially relevant to additional claims beyond simple trespass. Ellen filed the civil complaint the following Monday. Simultaneously, I went to the county sheriff's department and filed a criminal trespass complaint. The deputy who took the complaint was thorough. He asked to see the footage, which I showed him on my phone. He asked to see the fence modification, which I showed him in my yard. He asked for the documentation of the pattern of disturbance and the photographs I had taken before the cameras were installed. I had organized everything in a folder for exactly this purpose. He filed the complaint. He said, "Ma'am, do you want to proceed with this criminally?" I said yes. He said, "The footage is clear." I said that was the intention. Part 3, 4440. The civil and criminal proceedings ran simultaneously, which is legally permissible and which I had anticipated when I decided to file both. Ellen handled the civil case. I cooperated with the sheriff's department on the criminal matter. The criminal process moved first because it was straightforward. The footage was clear. The fence modification was documented. The pattern of disturbance over 3 years was documented. Constance had not denied using the pool in her written response. The sheriff's department forwarded the complaint to the county district attorney's office, which reviewed the evidence package and issued a criminal summons to Constance for criminal trespass. Constance retained an attorney for the criminal matter, a man named Gerald Odom, who had been practicing criminal defense in the county for 22 years. Gerald contacted the district attorney's office and proposed a resolution. He proposed that Constance pay a civil penalty and complete a period of community service in exchange for a dismissal of the criminal charge. The DA's office countered with a formal plea to a reduced charge with no jail time, but with a conviction on the record, a fine, and community service. Gerald came back with an offer that included no conviction. The DA's office declined. Gerald called Ellen to discuss whether the criminal matter could be resolved through the civil case. Ellen said the civil matter was separate and that any resolution of the civil case would not affect the criminal charge. Gerald asked whether I would be willing to decline to cooperate with the criminal prosecution if the civil case settled favorably. I was a retired magistrate judge. I told Ellen to tell Gerald that I had filed the criminal complaint because a crime had been committed, and that my cooperation with the prosecution was not a bargaining chip in a civil negotiation. Gerald apparently conveyed this to Constance, because Constance's attorney entered a guilty plea to the criminal trespass charge in November. The sentence was a fine of $750, 40 hours of community service, and 1 year of supervised probation. The criminal conviction was on the public record. The civil case settled in January of the following year. The settlement terms were $12,000 in damages, repair of the fence modification to its original condition at Constance's expense, and a written apology signed by Constance Pryor and witnessed by Gerald Odom. The damages figure was higher than Ellen's initial demand because the civil discovery process had produced information that changed the calculation. In her response to the civil complaint, Constance had maintained her position that the pool was a shared amenity. She had doubled down on this characterization in her deposition, testifying that she had understood the pool to be available to neighborhood residents based on what she described as the community character of the facility. Ellen had put the 2018 board meeting minutes in front of her during the deposition and read the specific language aloud. Constance had said she did not recall making that statement. Ellen had produced the meeting audio recording. The HOA had audio recorded all board meetings since 2017. Constance had known this because she had been the board president who had implemented the audio recording policy. The audio was clear. Constance's voice was clear. The statement that private pools in Fairview Oaks were entirely private and that the HOA had no claim on any homeowner's private amenity was clear. Ellen had asked Constance whether that was her voice. Constance had said she believed it was. Ellen had asked whether Constance stood by that characterization. Constance had said circumstances were different. Ellen had asked how the circumstances applicable to her own pool use differed from the circumstances she had described in 2018. Constance had not answered directly. The deposition excerpt went into Ellen's damages brief. The $12,000 settlement reflected 3 years of unauthorized use at a rate the court had indicated was reasonable based on the comparable pool membership analysis, the fence repair costs, the full legal fees, and what Ellen described in her settlement demand as an aggravated trespass premium, given the modification of my property, the pattern of deliberate concealment, and Constance's repeated false characterizations of the pool's status despite her own contradictory statements. Constance paid the settlement through a wire transfer from her personal account. The fence repair was conducted by a licensed contractor Constance hired within the settlement's 30-day window. The contractor rebuilt the modified section with proper screws properly installed, producing a fence section that matched the rest of the perimeter. I had the repair inspected by my own contractor before acknowledging its completion. The written apology was the part I had thought most carefully about. Ellen had drafted language for it. I had reviewed it with the attention of someone who had spent 7 years thinking about what language accomplishes in legal documents. The apology stated that Constance Pryor acknowledged entering Patricia Sohn's private pool enclosure without permission on multiple occasions over a period of approximately 3 years. By passing through a fence section, she had modified for that purpose, that she acknowledged this conduct was trespass, that she acknowledged it was inconsistent with her stated position regarding private pools in Fairview Oaks, and that she apologized to Patricia Sohn for the unauthorized use of her private property and for the inconvenience and legal process that her conduct had necessitated. Gerald Odom had negotiated the language through 3 drafts. The final version said what I needed it to say. Constance signed it. Gerald witnessed it. I received it by email on a January afternoon and read it once at my kitchen table with a cup of tea. Then I filed it in the folder where I kept the deed, the pool permits, the camera footage, the board meeting minutes, and the photographs of the fence modification. The folder was complete. The Fairview Oaks HOA held new elections in March. Constance did not run for the board president position. She nominated herself for a committee position, which several board members declined to support given the circumstances. She remained a homeowner in Fairview Oaks because a civil and criminal proceeding about pool trespass does not compel someone to sell their home. She lived 2 lots from mine. I did not have hostile feelings toward her. I had the specific settled feeling that I had known since my first year on the bench was what the resolution of a matter through proper legal process produces, regardless of whether the matter is significant or small. The process had worked. The evidence had been gathered correctly. The proceedings had been conducted properly. The outcome reflected the facts. I swam my laps on Tuesday morning at 6:45 after my call with my daughter. The pool surface was undisturbed. The gate was locked. The fence was intact. The camera system was still active, still recording to the cloud, still sending motion alerts to my phone when anything moved in my pool enclosure. My daughter had asked, in the January call after I told her the settlement was final, what the whole experience had taught me. I had thought about that. I said it had taught me what I already knew from 7 years on the bench, which was that most problems involving unauthorized use of private property persist, because the property owner does not document them systematically from the first indication that something is wrong. I had found a damp towel on my pool ladder 4 times before I understood what I was finding. The 5th time I understood and acted. If I had acted on the 3rd time, I would have had less documentation and a shorter history to present. If I had acted on the 1st time, I would have had almost nothing. The decision to install the cameras rather than confront immediately had been a legal decision as much as a tactical one. I needed documentation that would be unambiguous in the proceedings I anticipated. The footage from that Tuesday morning at 6:23 was unambiguous. My daughter said, "You were patient." I said, "I was methodical." She said, "Is there a difference?" I said, "Patience is waiting. Methodical is knowing what you are building while you wait. The pool is private. It has always been private. It will remain private." The sign I had posted at the gate after the settlement was the same size and format as the weight limit signs I had seen on my neighbor's bridge, the ones that worked because they were visible and the documentation behind them was complete. Mine said, "Private pool, no entry without permission of owner, violators subject to criminal prosecution." The sign was accurate. The documentation was complete. The camera was running. The gate was locked. Everything exactly as it should be. Framed thumbnail text. Karen kept using MY private pool. Subtext caught her on camera. She lost everything.